That night, when I saw her in the mirror, and the next second, she wasn't just a reflection anymore. Her hand reached out cold and real, and I couldn't pull away. I knew in that instant my life had changed forever, and there was no turning back. It all started when I went to my grandmother's house. I never thought I would inherit my grandmother's house. It was one of those sprawling, old estates tucked away in the countryside, the kind that looked picturesque from a distance but grew stranger the closer you got. The road leading up to it was cracked and overgrown, flanked by gnarled oaks that clawed at the sky. When I first saw the house, its dark shingles and shuttered windows made me shiver, though I tried to tell myself it was just the wind. Inside, everything smelled like dust and old wood. The air was heavier than I expected, thick with the scent of varnish, damp curtains, and something faintly metallic I couldn't identify. Every step I took on the wooden floors echoed through the empty halls, and I realized how quiet it really was. No hum of appliances, no distant traffic, only the creak of the floorboards and the occasional tap of some unseen draft against the windows. I had spent hours wandering from room to room, trying to convince myself that this house was simply old and neglected. My grandmother had been eccentric, but she had loved her belongings. Antique chairs, faded tapestries, and stacks of old books lined the walls. But one object in particular drew my attention, a tall, ornate mirror in the corner of what must have been her bedroom. It was draped with a thick, dust-stained cloth. Its frame was carved with twisting vines and strange, almost human faces in the corners, frozen in expressions of anguish or warning. I couldn't tell which. I didn't want to pull the cloth away at first. Something about it felt wrong. My skin prickled whenever I glanced in its direction, an instinctual warning I couldn't shake. But curiosity won. I lifted the fabric, letting it fall to the floor with a soft thud, and froze. The mirror itself was flawless, unnervingly so. Its glass reflected the room with such clarity that I could see every detail of the dusty floor and the piles of clothing on a chair. But then I noticed it, a flicker in the corner of the reflection. At first, I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow from the tree branches brushing the window outside. But then it moved again. A shape, pale and indistinct, lingering just behind me in the reflection. I whipped around, heart hammering, and of course, the room was empty. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "You're imagining it," I whispered to myself. Yet when I looked back at the mirror, the air around it seemed colder, as if the glass itself had sucked the warmth from the room. The shadow, or whatever it was, vanished the moment I blinked, leaving only the clear reflection of myself staring back. That night, I didn't sleep well. The bed was uncomfortable, the sheets stiff and scratchy, and every creak of the house made me sit up, heart thudding. I kept imagining that shadow behind me in the mirror, a pale figure waiting just beyond the glass. Even with the lights on, the corners of the room felt alive with a presence I couldn't see directly. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the carved faces in the mirror frame twisting toward me, whispering silently. Morning brought some relief. Though I found myself hesitating to enter the bedroom again, I tried to distract myself by exploring the rest of the house, discovering a library filled with musty tomes and a kitchen that smelled faintly of rusted metal, though no appliance had been plugged in for years. The further I walked, the more I felt that subtle weight pressing at the back of my mind, as if the house itself was aware of my presence. By afternoon, I had returned to the bedroom. Unable to resist the pull of the mirror, I examined the carvings again, running my fingers over the grooves in the wood. The faces were intricate, too intricate to be random, and the expressions seemed to shift ever so slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. I caught my reflection again, nothing unusual, but then, just as I was about to turn away, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Something crouched in the glass, pale, tangled hair covering its face. When I blinked, it was gone. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, not the kind that comes from a cold draft, but a deep, sinking sensation, as if the house was warning me to leave. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that stress and grief were making my mind play tricks. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror had changed, that something else was in there now, watching, waiting. I didn't know it yet, but pulling that cloth away had started something patient, something that had been waiting quietly for me. And I had looked back. The night after I uncovered the mirror, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows made my stomach tighten. I kept imagining the shadow I had seen the night before, crouched just behind me in the reflection, watching silently. I told myself it was grief, the loneliness, the unfamiliarity of this massive house. But even as I reasoned it away, an unease burrowed deep into my chest, tightening like a vice. The next morning, I returned to the bedroom despite every instinct screaming not to. I couldn't stay away. The mirror stood silently, the carved faces staring at me as though waiting for my attention. I studied the glass closely, and at first, nothing seemed unusual. My reflection moved with me perfectly as it should, but then I noticed it. Small, almost imperceptible differences. A slight hesitation in my movements. A subtle smirk on my face that I hadn't made. I froze, staring. Nothing else moved. The room was still, the sunlight streaming weakly through dust-streaked windows. And yet, I could feel it. A presence just beyond perception, lingering in the air, in the cold that clung to the corners of the room. I tried to breathe slowly, telling myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I already knew it wasn't. That afternoon, I went through some of my grandmother's belongings. Hoping for some distraction, I found a small journal, leather-bound and brittle with age. Her handwriting was elegant, curling across the yellowed pages. I skimmed through it, expecting ordinary musings. Instead, I found a series of warnings. Do not uncover her. She waits. She always waits. The mirror is not a reflection, it is a doorway. My hands trembled. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on my shoulders. A faint whisper drifted past my ears. So quiet, I almost didn't catch it. You shouldn't have... I spun around. The room was empty. Only the mirror remained, unblinking, reflecting me with perfect clarity. That evening, the whispers grew louder. I had been sitting on the floor, reading old letters from my grandmother when I first heard it clearly, a soft, lilting voice coming from the direction of the mirror. Look at me. My blood ran cold. I tried to rationalize it, maybe the wind through the cracked window panes or the pipes groaning, but my body told a different story. My palms sweated, my heart pounded, and my stomach churned. I felt as though someone had placed a cold hand over my chest. I glanced at the mirror again. For a moment, I thought I saw a pale face framed by black hair, peering at me from behind the glass. I blinked, and it was gone. My reflection was normal, perfectly synchronized with my own movements, and yet, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Sleep that night was worse. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch toward me. Every flicker of the candle cast shapes that danced and twisted unnaturally. I kept imagining the pale woman in the mirror, crouched and silent, waiting for me to look away so she could move closer. I couldn't escape the sensation of being observed, not just in the room, but somewhere deeper, in a place I couldn't see. Days passed, and the occurrences grew bolder. Objects I had left in one place were found in another, always near the mirror. A chair toppled over when I wasn't looking. My grandmother's jewelry, carefully stored in a box, was sometimes scattered across the floor, shining unnaturally in the candlelight. Each time, I tried to convince myself it was my own forgetfulness, but each incident left a bitter chill creeping up my spine. I started to dream of the woman in the mirror. At first, the dreams were vague, shadowy glimpses, a whisper calling my name. But then she became more distinct. Pale skin stretched over sharp cheekbones, eyes hollow yet unyielding, and hair that hung in wet, tangled strands. In the dream, she would reach out for me, and I would wake with my sheets damp with sweat, my heart racing as though I had been running for my life. By the end of the week, I realized I was avoiding the mirror whenever possible. I covered it with a blanket during the day, though at night I would wake to find it partially uncovered, the cloth lying on the floor. It was as if she were daring me to look, to acknowledge her presence. And deep down, despite the terror, a small, irrational part of me wanted to. I tried to talk to someone about it, but I couldn't. Who would believe me? Friends would laugh it off. Strangers would call me crazy. I was left alone with the mirror and its quiet, oppressive power. I began to sense a pattern. She wasn't just haunting me. She was communicating, testing me, drawing me in. And the more I resisted, the stronger the pull seemed to become. That night, as I sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the covered mirror, I swore I heard breathing. Not mine, not the wind, but slow, deliberate, coming from just beyond the cloth. My body froze, every nerve screaming at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Then a whisper. I see you. I forced my eyes onto the blanket, my hands shaking as I reached to smooth it. Nothing stirred. And yet, when I finally looked at the reflection again, after pulling the cloth carefully aside, I froze in terror. There she was, standing behind me, pale and silent, hair clinging to her face like wet threads. eyes hollow yet fixed on mine, and for the first time, she didn't disappear. I realized then that she had been waiting all along, and I had been foolish enough to notice. After that night, I stopped trying to convince myself it was just imagination. The woman in the mirror was real. She was there, and she was waiting. I couldn't escape the feeling that every glance in the glass was being measured, assessed, catalogued. Even during the day when the sunlight should have chased shadows away, I could feel her presence, cold and relentless, pressing against the edges of my awareness. The first time she spoke directly, it was subtle. I had been cleaning the bedroom, brushing dust from the ornate frame, when I felt it. The faintest shift in the air, like a sigh, a quick exhale that wasn't my own. Then the whisper, "Do you see me?" My heart leapt into my throat. I spun around, half expecting her to be standing behind me in the room itself, but of course, there was nothing. Only the mirror. I took a step closer. My own reflection stared back at me. But she was there too. Pale, unmoving, hair dripping in dark strands that clung to the sharp angles of her face. Her eyes were hollow but glinting, watching me in a way that felt impossibly intimate, as though she had known me all my life. The whisper came again, low and deliberate, "Look closer." I couldn't resist. Even as every instinct screamed to turn away, I leaned in, and that's when the glass seemed to warp. Her face stretched unnaturally, as if it had been compressed for decades, and then snapped back smooth and human again. The effect was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, but the sensation lingered. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, a prickling cold that rose like ice through my bones. That night, I dreamt of her again. I was standing in the bedroom, but the walls were gone, replaced by an endless black void. She emerged from the mirror, her body dripping with some dark, viscous fluid that made a soft, squelching sound as it hit the floor. Her eyes met mine, and I realized they were not empty. They were hungry, patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move, and then I woke, gasping, heart pounding, sheets tangled around my body like the limbs of some predator. By the following day, the house seemed to shift around me. Doors I had left closed were open, hallways seemed longer, and the air was colder than it had any right to be in the afternoon. The mirror's pull was irresistible. I caught myself staring at it for minutes at a time, mesmerized, as if some invisible thread was drawing me nearer. I noticed that in the reflection, objects moved on their own. A chair would tilt slightly, a book would shift, always when I wasn't watching. Sometimes I thought I glimpsed a hand behind me, pale and skeletal, reaching through the glass, only to vanish when I turned. I began talking to her. It felt insane, but I had to know. "Who are you?" I whispered one evening, my voice trembling. The mirror remained still for a long moment. Then, slowly, she raised a hand, mimicking my own gesture. Her voice, soft and distant, came again. "I am her. I am waiting. I have always been waiting." The words made my stomach knot. I realized she wasn't just observing me. She was trying to communicate, trying to draw me in. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread and fascination, a pull I couldn't resist. I spent hours reading through my grandmother's journals, desperate for some explanation, some story to make sense of what I was experiencing. The entries were sparse, cryptic warnings: "Do not stare, do not answer, do not invite her." I laughed bitterly at one point, trying to convince myself that it was nonsense, but the moment I looked at the mirror again, the hair fell away from her face slightly, revealing the faintest, twisted smile. And then she whispered my name, slow, deliberate. "You see me now." I began noticing small changes in my own reflection. My movements sometimes lagged behind reality, as though the reflection was testing me, mirroring me imperfectly. Shadows clung to the corners of the room, moving against the light. I would wake in the middle of the night to find the blanket covering the mirror pulled halfway down, though I was certain I had tucked it tightly around the frame. Then one night she spoke clearly, her words echoing in my mind rather than my ears. "Come closer. I will show you." I froze, my pulse hammering in my chest. The air grew icy, my breath visible in soft clouds, as if the room itself had become a winter night. My fingers itched to touch the glass, though every rational thought screamed that I shouldn't. But I reached out anyway. The moment my hand brushed the mirror's surface, a shock ran through me. Not electric, but something older, colder, alive. I felt her behind the glass, pressing against it, as if she had substance, as if she were reaching for me from another world entirely. My reflection flinched, and her eyes burned into mine, hollow and yet filled with centuries of longing and rage. I stumbled back, heart racing, trying to convince myself it was some trick of the shadow, some clever interplay of light and dark. And yet, when I dared to look again, she was closer. Her hand pressed against the inside of the glass, aligned perfectly with mine, and I swear I felt a faint pressure, as if she were pushing, pulling me toward her. That night, sleep was impossible. Every shadow in the room seemed alive. Every creak in the floor was a footstep, every gust of wind a whisper of her voice. And yet, even in terror, I found myself drawn to the mirror, unable to tear my eyes away. I realized then, in a cold, sinking certainty, that she wasn't just a reflection. She was waiting, patient and eternal. And every glance I gave her, every moment I lingered, brought her closer, and I was powerless to stop it. I should have left the house that night. Every instinct screamed at me to pack a bag, slam the doors, and never return. But I didn't. Something heavier than curiosity, colder than fear, anchored me in that bedroom. I could feel her waiting, beyond the glass, behind the reflection, patient as a predator circling its prey. The mirror loomed in the corner like a silent sentinel, taller than I remembered, its ornate carvings casting grotesque shadows across the walls. The air felt viscous, as though each breath I took was being sucked into the glass itself. My reflection stared back at me, perfectly synchronized, until she peered. Her face emerged from the surface, pale and wet, hair dripping across her cheeks like ink spreading in water. Her eyes were hollow but glimmered with an unnatural intelligence, staring straight into mine, and then slowly, deliberately, she smiled. Not a friendly smile, but one that twisted her features into something inhuman, something that knew me in ways I did not yet understand. I stumbled back. My heart slammed against my ribs, my pulse hammering like a drumbeat in the quiet room. The temperature plummeted, frost creeping along the edges of the window panes, my breath hanging in clouds. Shadows began to shift independently, writhing toward the mirror, as though the room itself were alive and obeying her will. Then she moved, not in the reflection, through it. One long, slender hand pressed against the inside of the glass, and the surface rippled like water. I watched, paralyzed, as her fingers extended outward, the glass warping and stretching as if it were a membrane separating her from this world. My own hands instinctively went up, trying to shield myself, but I was frozen, trapped in a mixture of terror and fascination. "You see me now," she whispered, her voice a hiss that seemed to echo inside my skull rather than my ears. "I've always been waiting for you." Before I could react, her hand broke through, not solid flesh, not yet, but wet and cold, dripping a dark substance that smelled metallic, like blood mixed with rust. The air around me trembled, vibrating with a low hum that seemed to come from the mirror itself. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the bed, and crashed to the floor. The reflection no longer mimicked me. She had become independent. Every movement she made was deliberate, predatory, as though studying how to reach me, how to pull me into the cold, hollow world she inhabited. The shadows in the room began to coalesce, thick and writhing, forming shapes that slithered across the walls and ceiling. Some resembled her, some resembled nothing human at all. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound that seemed to bounce off the walls, swallowed by the darkness. And then the mirror cracked. A single line zigzagged across the surface, like a vein of lightning frozen in glass. From the fracture, I glimpsed her fully, pale, skeletal, hair wet and clinging, eyes wide and gleaming. She pressed forward, her body elongating, unnaturally flexible, reaching for me with both hands now. The pressure in the room intensified. My chest ached as though the air itself were trying to crush me. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to escape, but the door slammed shut, hard. The lock clicked. My hands shook violently as I tried to open it, pounding and screaming, but it was useless. The room itself seemed to shift, the walls breathing, closing in. Shadows swirled around me, pulling at my clothes, my hair, my skin. And through it all, she whispered, over and over, "Come with me, stay with me, forever." I backed into a corner, pressing my palms against the wall. The mirror seemed to grow taller, wider, stretching into something impossible. Her face now filled the entire surface, dripping wet strands of hair across the glass like black tendrils reaching for me. Her hollow eyes burned into mine, and I realized she knew me, knew my fears, my memories, my regrets, every secret, every sin laid bare beneath her gaze. And then she laughed, not a human laugh, but a wet gurgling sound that seemed to echo from the walls, the floor, and inside my own head. My knees buckled. I felt as though my soul had been caught in a vice, twisted and pulled toward the mirror. Every instinct told me to fight, to run, to destroy the glass, but my body wouldn't obey. I could only stare, frozen in terror as she began to emerge fully, her form dripping blackened liquid that hissed as it hit the floor. I reached out blindly, grabbing a heavy candlestick. I swung at the mirror, shattering part of the surface. Cracks spiderwebbed across it instantly, but the figure did not recoil. Instead, she pressed forward through the fracture, more solid than ever, her pale fingers curling around the edge of the glass. She whispered again, closer now, directly into my ear. "You cannot leave. You are mine." Pain shot through my head. Images flashed, my grandmother trapped in the mirror decades ago, screaming silently. The house bending to her will, faces of past victims frozen in the glass. I screamed again, falling backward, the candlestick clattering uselessly across the floor. She advanced, one step closer, and I could feel her cold breath against my cheek, smell the metallic tang of rust and decay. With a surge of desperation, I grabbed the corner of the shattered mirror and hurled it across the room. The shards scattered, but they didn't stop her. Every piece reflected her face, multiplying her presence until it felt as though she was everywhere at once. My heart pounded. My lungs burned. But I realized something terrifying. I hadn't defeated her. I had merely released her. She whispered once more, softer now, almost gentle, "Thank you for noticing me." The lights flickered, and in the brief moment of darkness, I thought I saw her step fully into the room, solid and grinning. My scream caught in my throat. And then, silence. I didn't move for hours, sitting in the corner, shivering and drenched in sweat. The mirror lay in broken shards at my feet, but I could still feel her. The air was thick, heavy with presence, and shadows curled unnaturally in every corner. I realized then that she was no longer confined to the glass. She had entered the room, the house, maybe even me. And worst of all, I understood. She had been patient all along, waiting for the moment I looked away, waiting for me to think I was safe, and I would never be safe again. The morning after the encounter, I didn't move. The shards of the mirror lay scattered across the floor, sharp and glittering like teeth, but the room felt wrong. The shadows didn't retreat with the sunlight. They clung to the corners, curling unnaturally, moving independently. And though the mirror was broken, I could still feel her, watching, patient, waiting. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, to escape this house and never look back. But I couldn't. Every part of me ached with exhaustion, yet there was a magnetic pull that held me there. I realized with a sinking terror that the house itself had changed. The air was thick and sweet like iron and decay, and every surface seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. Days passed, though I barely noticed them. I couldn't sleep properly, couldn't eat more than a few bites at a time. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at any reflective surface, a spoon, a window, the glossy pages of an old book, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw her. Always just at the edge of perception, pale and patient, grinning in the shadows. I tried to clean the room, removing every trace of the shattered glass, but it was useless. Every time I looked away, I imagined a flicker of movement, a pale hand brushing against the wall, a shadow that didn't belong. It was as though she had seeped into the very structure of the house, entwined with the air, the wood, the very fabric of reality. And then it happened. I was brushing my hair in the bathroom mirror, one of the smaller, ordinary mirrors in the hallway, when I saw her. Not a flicker, not a shadow. She stood behind me, pale and wet, hair clinging to her face, hollow eyes boring into mine. I spun around. The hallway was empty. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I turned back to the mirror. She was closer now, grinning, almost satisfied. I could see the reflection of her hand press against the glass, and I felt a strange, cold pressure on my own palm. I pulled back, stumbled, and hit the floor. My heart hammered, sweat running down my face. I realized then that she wasn't limited to the old, ornate mirror anymore. The house had become her domain, and every reflective surface was a doorway. She could watch me anywhere, at any time, and I could never look away completely. Every mirror, every window, every polished surface was her eyes now. The nights were the worst. Even with all the lights on, I could feel her moving, hear her faint whispering just beyond comprehension. I would wake to find objects displaced, shadows shifting unnaturally, and sometimes I would catch a glimpse of her standing behind me in a reflection I hadn't noticed before. Always smiling, always patient, always waiting. I tried leaving once, packed my bag, ran to my car, and drove miles down the winding country roads. For a moment, it felt like relief, freedom, air that wasn't heavy with her presence. But that night, as I lay in the unfamiliar hotel room, I saw her, standing behind the glass of the window, pale, hair wet, eyes hollow. I slammed the blinds, covered the glass, but the sensation didn't leave. She had followed me. I began to see her in my own reflection, in photos, even in the glossy surfaces of my phone. A fleeting flicker, a pale hand, a hollow smile. She was patient, always waiting. And I realized with absolute clarity, she would never leave. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash every reflective surface I owned. But even as I did, I knew it wouldn't help. She didn't need a mirror anymore. She was everywhere, entwined with me, with my sight, with my life. I could feel her whisper in my mind, soft and insistent. You are mine. You cannot escape. You always see me. Some nights I hear footsteps in the house, though I live alone. Sometimes the floorboards creak as though someone is pacing behind me, and when I turn, there is nothing. But I know she's there, always there, watching, waiting, smiling, patiently, eternally. I don't leave the house anymore. I don't want to, because when I do, I see her in every reflective surface, and yet, part of me is drawn to her. Part of me wants to see her face, wants to feel the cold brush of her hand against mine, wants to know what she's waiting for. I don't dare look into a mirror now unless I absolutely must, and when I do, I can't stop staring. Not completely. Her eyes find mine, and I feel that pull, that irresistible force drawing me closer, whispering promises I cannot resist. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind rattles the windows and the house groans under its own weight, I hear her voice clearly. I've always been waiting for you, and now you see me. I know deep down that this is only the beginning. She is patient, she is eternal, and I am trapped, bound to her gaze, bound to the mirrors, bound to the house. I do not know if there is a way to escape. I do not know if anyone ever has. And yet even now, when I close my eyes, I feel her watching, smiling, waiting, and I will never be alone again. I shouldn't have let it happen. Yet part of me can't forget the way it felt, the pull I couldn't resist. Every glance, every touch lingers in my mind like a secret I can't undo. We crossed a line, one we were never meant to cross. What are we now? I need to know. Tell me what you think. Could it ever be more than temptation?